I know this is traditionally a very nuts and bolts kind of organization, so I hope you don't feel like I'm cramming my information down your throat. I'd like you to kind of suspend your disbelief for a moment and wonder, what if? What could be different about civilization right now if these technologies exist? My grandfather was a part of some experiment that was similar to Project Whitecoat, according to family lore. I grew up hearing that he was a Seventh-day Adventist, was a conscientious objector, and when he was drafted, he went in and agreed to go into this alternate program. And in this program, he was given different viruses or bacteria, depending on which program he was in. And he got very ill, and for a couple of weeks, he was sitting up with a pillow behind his back, and his back fused that way. So he was on disability from that for his whole life. And we were never allowed to talk about his time in the military. It was some big secret. And it was something that, it was discussed, that he was a part of a secret experiment. Okay, so I've been doing a show for a couple years, if you haven't heard, called Cosmic Disclosure with David Wilcock. And it's basically been two guys kind of doing a briefing, with a fake brick wall behind us, and a little bit of a set, but it's mainly been about the information. And I really didn't expect it to be so wildly popular. In that series, I've talked about what we call the MiLab programs. And MiLab just simply stands for military abduction. Now, some programs have come out, like MK Ultra, some of the programs they did, back in the 50s and 60s in the civilian population secretly. Well, using civilian assets is something that they've done as well. And with civilian assets, there's even less chance of a documentation. Apparently, before we'd even discovered genetics, we were delivering genetic changes to people through viruses, using viruses as carriers. And that has been done that's also been done through vaccines to the general population. I don't think there are many here that I'll have to convince of that. So I was also identified, I was definitely popping up on the radar for that, being involved in this family that was a part of this program. I was further identified during standardized testing in school. I popped up as an anomaly. They sent a person out to do a one-on-one interview with me, had me go through, do all these different tests, even had me draw. And then there was one more person that I ended up talking to. Her name was Mrs. Hill. She ended up being involved quite a bit, and she's the one that administered a lot of the different, tests with the different psychic deck cards, having you guess, having you what's in another room in an envelope, trying to, see if you could figure it out. And I was, only like 6 years old. It was very bizarre. And apparently I was identified as being, there's a spectrum, intuitive empath spectrum, and I was identified as being well within the two, which they thought would be useful, and they're able to enhance that with genetic manipulation. Now, they had placed me in alternative classes with my parents' permission. My parents had no idea that it was a part of any type of military program. But they did know that I would be going off campus and fairly often. And what would occur is that a white van would pick usually just myself up and drive me out to Carswell Air Force Base. And, a person recently asked me about, where on the base it was, because they had worked there and been assigned there for a good period of time. I described, how they would always take us through the back entrance, back gate. We would drive across at least 2 runways, take a right, go through another security gate, and then end up in a motor pool hangar for cars. Now, often, as strange as this sounds, they would pick kids up in the middle of the night, parents would not know, and you would show up with, you would see the usual 9 to 15 kids that you were training with and spending time with. There would be other kids that would, kind of wash out or have issues and not stay with a group. But you would get together with all these other groups or cells and have training at night in these big indoor malls that they have in Texas. And I'm sure they had them here, but this was back in the 70s. And it turns out that we were being introduced before we were in the programs even to non-terrestrials. And then they slowly started to introduce us to them. You would go into a virtual reality simulation, and there would be a couple of doctors, maybe military, sitting at a card table. And then when you would go through the simulation and you would come out, and then there would be a gray or a different type of non-terrestrial sitting at the table all of a sudden. No one would say anything about it. You would just get up and walk out. And they would start to slowly acclimate you to these beings, because it can be quite overwhelming. There were hybrid children that we also saw in these programs and at the Air Force Base, underground anyway. Originally, I was assigned to the research vessel, but the person that was the current captain did not want me on there. They had had a few incidents to where they had some of the very young civilian assets come on the research vessel, and they spend 3 to 6 months with the kid sobbing in his rack. So they didn't want to deal with that. They wanted to make sure that I was more prepared when I came back to serve. So they assigned me to this program that was called the Intruder, Intercept, and Interrogate, the I3 program, and it was similar to the Men in Black program, except that they were doing mainly the interrogation of these beings, finding out why they were here, who they were. A lot of times they were being, the regular military had been arresting these people, and they found out that they were not really people. They had found a way to blend in. And there were even incidents of some of these beings working in high-rise buildings, blending in with us. This program I was involved with for almost a year, about 10 months. Also, it's interesting, the Lunar Operation Command is basically air traffic control for around a certain distance around the Earth. And they would work very closely. If a craft would come in, would not provide a friend or foe signal, they would be intercepted and interrogated in some fashion. So these programs are built around strict secrecy, and pretty much any documentation can only be accessed in a skiff room. The information it's very unlikely for it to make it outside of the skiff room. Now, in order to maintain secrecy, they also use a lot of protocols. They'll use the same operational names, but have deeper operations classified under that operation name. So it causes confusion when people do research. And they keep strict control over all evidence. And there are many in the military, maybe even some people that are in this room right now, that have willingly gone through that process for patriotic reasons, that know they're doing something important. At the end of the day, they know they're going to be blank slated. That's something that's done fairly commonly. Of course, the Nazi origins trace back to the Vril Society and the Thule Society. Now, some of these Nazi groups were sending out small parties of like 9 to 12 men who were going through Tibet and areas of China and interrogating monks that were guarding manuscripts and information. And they were also very interested in a Nordic type of non-terrestrial that many of these monks were in communication with, and they were protecting the entrances to where they were, and the Nazis wanted to get in contact with them. And of course, Maria Orsic, I'm told, was able to definitely get in contact through her group, the Vril Society, through at first telepathically, and began to get a lot of very technical information that they were able to show to various people within the Nazi Party that saw that this was actual, she wasn't receiving gibberish. And of course, Operation Paperclip, I was told that it was quite a bit more than 1,600 German scientists that were obtained by the United States, that many more were obtained and went into deep, dark programs. But, you know, this was pretty much, the US didn't realize that this was an infiltration. This, you know, this Nazi group was basically coming in to infiltrate. And their plan was to take over the military-industrial complex. You know, we were able to build 10 planes for every one of theirs. They wanted to use that industrial might to colonize space and build out all of this technology in space. The Lunar Operation Command. That was originally built by this, what Richard Dolan, using his terminology, breakaway civilization. It was a Nazi breakaway group, and they had started a small footprint on the moon. And when they originally built this facility, it really was shaped like a swastika. But they built it out later to break up the look of the swastika. The way it was built, depending on your access, if you were in the programs and you were able to get to the Lunar Operation Command, you may only know of the surface facilities. Below, it went down, shaped kind of like a bell, and there were many levels of facilities where they, depending on your access, you wouldn't even know about the facilities. Here's kind of a look at the way it used to appear. And then we're going to go, in the crater, there was an area that looked like another mini crater, but when you flew into it, you appeared inside this area that I was trying to describe earlier. And the craft would enter through these different hangar bays. The base has a type of cloaking that if you're looking at it from above, it looks like a mirage effect. You see nothing but moonscape, but with just a slightly little mirage. And and you can't tell the base is there at all. And it is on the dark side of the moon at about the 10 o'clock position. Now, the Germans actually had a little bit of a footprint on Mars, but were having a lot of difficulty there. But this exact modular concept is being used down in Antarctica, and later on, this modular concept of building was used. It was done quite a bit in the craft. Everything was modular, but when they built bases on other bodies in our solar system, they used a lot of the similar tactics that they developed here. Now, what types of projects are going on down there? What type of research are they doing? Just about anything that's illegal or unethical that you would get in trouble for anywhere else in the world, it's going on down here. They're doing a lot of unethical cloning, a lot of R&D on weapons platforms that they're developing. There's a spaceport that was handed over by the Nazis that they had developed out, but we further developed it. And a lot of these triangular craft and some of the Air Force craft are taking off from there to leave and go to low Earth orbit. And yeah, these are all black budget. You know, Lockheed Martin, companies like that are down there doing this research. And most of this is done by the corporations. It is joint, it is stated as being joint ET and human just because the area down there is controlled by non-terrestrials, and we had to basically work with them to get permission. They observe what we do very closely.